Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Sun City in Arizona. Hope you're all having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1252. Who was at the family event? What was the family event? How can you find out who was on the guest list or who attended? Especially if you have something like a funeral or a wedding, a reunion, a note in the paper that said Mr. and Mrs. Smith stopped by to visit their cousins, their relatives, their friends, their family. And, it may even state what the family relationship is. When you go back into the newspapers, I love the newspapers. They got so much cool stuff in them. When you go back into the newspapers for any society events or anything like that, a lot of the times back in the late 1800s through to probably around 1960s, you still saw it into 1970s, they would have the females listed as Mrs., the husband's first name and the husband's last name. A lot of the time, they may, and if she was unwed, it would have Miss, her first name and her last name, which made it easy to find them if they were not married. But if they were married, it's like, what the heck was that? What did you hit? Sorry, the dog just decided to go zooming up. Now I don't even know what she hit. There's like nothing there. She kind of like hit it in front of the sink, but there's nothing in front of the sink. Now she's looking around to go, what did I hit? Who knows? Anyway, so I got this idea off a question. I have these emails that I get daily on different things about genealogy, and one of them was about finding the relatives who had attended a funeral. You needed to that said that that this particular couple the Mr. and Mrs. attended a cousin's funeral. Who was the cousin? How could we find out? Well, you look at the article where it was written. You look at the article where it was written. It was it gave you a time frame because they had just gotten back from this person's funeral. Let's see. So we've got to determine who the cousin was. So to help with that is that look in the local newspapers where the funeral was held, because usually when they turn around and say that this person attended a cousin's funeral, they give you the day they attended the funeral and the town of where they were. And it may be a town in the same state. It could be they've just gotten back from out of town, from a different state. But now you have a date of when the funeral was held and where it was held. So now you just need to go to the local newspapers of that area, and for about a few days either side, like about 3 or 4 days either side, is look up to see who died during that time. Is the couple that are mentioned in the newspaper article having just returned? Are they mentioned in the obituary? If they're not mentioned in the obituary, which of those obituaries had a funeral that took place on that day in that town? And they may have other details there too that will help you narrow it down. So that's one way that you can find who attended, whose cousin, whose funeral did that. Oh, it was your toy. So now you've got that information that you can now narrow down to see who passed away, who had a funeral on that particular date, because they said, the newspaper article would state that Mr. and Mrs. John Smith attended a funeral of a cousin last Friday. So who was the cousin? Hello. I normally come up to say hello. And so by going to that area where they said that they were that they went to this funeral in this particular town, you can now go to that town, look at their local newspapers, what funerals did they have on that day, because some of them were in the obituary. Will actually turn around and say in the obituary that the funeral service will be held on. And if you're getting back into the 1800s, into the early 1900s, a lot of times the funerals were held within a day or two of them passing. It could be they passed on a Wednesday, Friday they're having the funeral. Or they passed on Thursday, we're having the funeral on Friday. And I'm just sort of like, man, they did some quick arrangements back then. When you think of all the work that goes into planning funerals these days. Even when Brad passed, he passed on September 20, 24th, and we didn't have his funeral till October 2nd, because that's when we could, we could fit everything in, and everything was arranged. Everything was already arranged. It was just, that was the first available date that they had. And it gave people from out of town time to come in. In those days, you didn't have a lot of people coming from long distances for funerals. They may have already been there when the person died, because they may have got the note saying, hey, they're fading fast. If you want to say your goodbyes, you got to get here as soon as possible. So they get on their trains, they get on their boats, and they get to wherever they're going. But that's one way that you can do it, is utilize newspaper articles to help find the names of people that attended. I have a client who we were looking for her paternal grandmother, and we had a name, and we kind of sort of knew the last name. We weren't really sure and all of that, but we started finding little bits and pieces that kept falling into place, and with the story that, the bits and pieces she'd been told over time. And I found this newspaper article in New York City in one of the New York local papers about this couple that got married, and it turned out to be her father's half brother, half sister, half brother. And she had never met anybody from her father's side of the family. And so we were able to put this together because the names were all matching up. When it got to it's even when you're looking at a wedding notice on some of these weddings back in the 1800s through to the 1970s and a little bit beyond as well, they were very detailed. They would say, here is the bride, this is her parents, here is the groom, here are his parents. And if one of the parents were deceased, it may say late, or it may not even mention the parent that's died. So now you've got the question, okay, we've got the mother, who was the father, or we've got the father, where's the mother? And when you start doing your research, you find out that they passed away before the wedding. And sometimes it'll put there one of the parents' names and late blah, 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 and the late Joan Smith. And then it will have who was in the wedding party. This person was the best man. This is how they're actually, this is the best man was John Jones, and he was the brother of the groom. Oh, the groom has a brother called John. Here are his groomsmen. And in there it may be listed as a friend, a brother, a cousin, a nephew. So it may list the actual relationship in there. And it's so you write all of that down. And then you go and on the bride side of the family, it does the same thing. Who was the maid or matron of honor? And a maid of honor was an unmarried woman. The matron of honor was a married woman, who was the chief bridesmaid, is basically what that term is. So you got chief bridesmaid, maid of honor, matron of honor, same thing. All the same thing. Maid is unmarried, matron is married, and chief bridesmaid, it's whichever you want it to be. And so they would then have that person listed and how they were related, and then we'll have all the bridesmaids listed and how they were related. These are the really good wedding notices. And then what they do, and then they describe the bride's dress, they describe the bridesmaid's dress, they describe what the groom was wearing, what the groomsmen were wearing, what the best man was wearing. All the clothes are described in great detail, and beautiful chiffon and tulle and satin and silk, and even what shoes they were wearing. So not just the dresses, the shoes also got mentioned, and any headdress that they had on. Did they have a tiara? Did they have a hat? Did they have a veil? Did they not have a veil? What was holding the veil in place? They got quite detailed in some of these articles are just amazing. And they're quite fun to read through. And then, what have in attendance was the bride's grandparents, and we'll have the grandparents listed, or the groom's grandparents. And then it will go other family members that attended from the bride's side were, and here's their list. And then other family members that attended from the groom's side, there's their list. Other people who attended, it will have them all listed. It may or may not say how they know the bridal couple. It could be a friend of the family. It could be a cousin. But usually they're listed in the family of. So you get a lot of detail from some of these older wedding notices. And of course, it won't just have Mr. John and Susan Smith. It would have Mr. John Smith as the relative, and it could be put there as brother and wife. And you're like, okay, so she has a brother called John. So that you can start putting pieces together and making up these lists of, here's the bride, here's her family, here's the siblings that are listed, here's the aunts and uncles that are listed, here's the grandparents, the parents. You can get a whole bunch of information. Here's the cousins, and the fun part is working out which cousins go with which. It helps when there are aunts that were married, aunts that were part of the family that married a male, because whatever kids have got the male's last name, they belong to that particular couple. They belong to that aunt and uncle, because the aunt is the sister of the bride's mother, or the groom's mother, or the groom's father, or the groom, so you can find out who's what, and you go, okay, so this is a family nucleus here. How are they related? Are they on the bride's side or on the groom's side? They're on the bride's side. Okay, so are they on the bride's father's? Are they a sister to the bride's father or the bride's mother? So then you just have to figure that portion out. But here's their little family right here, all listed. So it's very interesting what you can get off, and seeing this newspaper article in the New York, in one of the New York papers, about this couple that were actually from Jamaica, but they got married in New York City because that's where her parents were at the time, and the mother was unable to travel to Jamaica. It was all written in the article. It was all written in the article as to why they got married in New York, and that they would be returning to Jamaica. But first this is where they were going for the honeymoon, and then they were returning to Jamaica. And it was kind of like, wow. And it even had what their occupations were, and where they were going to be living. It had the full address. If you want to know what house they were going to be living in, the address was included in the newspaper article. But it was kind of cool because in there was listed the woman that we think is the paternal grandmother, and it had her children listed, and we already had the birth notices for the two older ones because of where they were born. And then we know that she had more children when she came to the US, and the father, and my client's father, was born somewhere in between that time. And there's a very interesting story about his birth and all of that. But so she now got to, and not only that, there were photographs in there. There was a photograph of the bride and groom, so she finally got to see what her uncle looked like, because she'd never seen her uncle before, never seen a photograph of him. We also found a photograph of her aunt that she had never seen before, never met. They are all now passed, so now she's looking at the cousins to see what cousins are around that she can maybe connect with. So it's kind of, and find out more about their family history and things. So it's kind of cool when you can do stuff like that. But look at wedding notices, who was there. Especially if it's a notice that comes up that's a name that you're looking for, you've got a whole bunch of information there. Now you can go digging a little deeper. I also love obituaries for finding out not who was at the funeral, although there may be articles about today we had the funeral service for blah, 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 and in attendance were da, 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 da. There may be notices like that. Very rarely have I seen those, but I know they're out there. But I love the obituaries, because especially the ones that have had a lot of thought put into them, because some of them are so well written. You know exactly who's related to who in the family tree. But it's also too, you have to look, when you're looking at obituaries, who is providing that information. Is it somebody with firsthand knowledge that, yes, these are the children, these are the grandchildren, these are the nieces and nephews? Or is it somebody who could be a family member but isn't quite sure? Oh, I think this person, because some of them will put like, some of the obituaries are like, this person died, they were the son of the late blah, 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 and so and so. And it might have the mother's maiden name in there. Oh, we got another piece of the puzzle. And then it might have, and they're survived by their children, survived by his children, and then his children are listed, survived by his brothers, survived by his sisters. But here's the really cool part about obituaries. On the obituaries, if the children are married, or the siblings are married as well, it may put in there in parentheses. So the first name listed will be the sibling. The second name listed, that could be in parentheses, usually in parentheses, is the name of the person they got married to. So now you can match these people up. Like, yes. Oh, I love it. And then you go down further. And of course, if there's any girls married, they've now got a different last name. And so now you look for all the children with that same name, and you know they belong to that female. Whether she's an aunt, whether she's a sister, you now know who her children are. A daughter, you now know who her children are. And then if they've only got one son and there's grandsons listed with the same name, and usually they go in age order. So here's another tip. If you're reading obituaries, typically, not always, but typically, the people when they're listed, whether it's siblings, it may say brothers, the brothers will be listed in birth order. Sisters, they're listed in birth order. Children, they are listed in birth order. Grandchildren, they are listed in birth order. So that can help a lot as well. So you can find lots of clues in newspaper articles. And all it started off with was that you saw that these people went to a cousin's funeral that was on Friday in this particular town, and the cousin's name is not mentioned. So now you go to that local paper, you find the funeral notices for that day, how many people, and you may even come across somebody who has the same name as the couple that went to the funeral. So there's a possibility. So that's a possibility. How many other funerals were held that day? What other information does the article provide? It provides their name, that they went to a cousin's funeral. It was on Friday. It was in this particular town. Does it list the cemetery that they were at? Does it list the church that they were in, or the synagogue, or the temple? Where did they hold the funeral service? Was it held at the chapel at the cemetery? Do they list any of that information? Do they also list other people that traveled with them? Because they may have different last names because of females getting married. That could be the same last name as the cousin. You never know. And that's just one way that you can find out, who was at the funeral. Just go look. Go see, read the obituaries. Are they mentioned in the obituaries? Maybe a cousin. Some people go as far as cousins. Most people just do, here's the parents, here's maybe the grandparents, especially if the grandparents are still alive. But here is the spouse, here are their children, here are their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. Oh, and by the way, they've also got siblings as well, if there are siblings that are still alive. Sometimes they may not list the siblings, or they do, and they have late in parentheses after their name, meaning that they've passed. Or it could be that here's who they survived by, and here are those that predeceased them. So they will do it that way as well. So it's kind of interesting, but you can find out all sorts. So, when you've got a question where you see something that so-and-so went and visited with family in this particular, just got back from visiting with family in that particular town, you're like, sometimes, it could be their daughter, it could be their son. If it's the son, okay, let's go look in that last name in city directories and see who we can find with that last name. Let's have a look at census reports. Do we find any census reports that put, this couple together with the children in a census somewhere? Where do we start looking for the census? How long have they lived in this town? They've been in this town for 30 years. Okay, they're going to be on, and then, okay, they've been in this town since this date. There was a census date here, here, and here. Let's go look at those, see the names of their children, see if any of them match up with this name of this person that they've gone to visit. And you might get, they had a daughter called Dottie. Oh, all right, probably Dorothy, or could be Dot, Dorothy, other D names. So let's have a look at the census reports. So you find Dottie on the census reports, and you find about when she was birthed. So let's have a look for her birth information. Let's have a look for her marriage information, because we know that they visited somebody with this last name. Where's their marriage information? Did they get married in that town? Did they get married in that town? And so you're putting the pieces of the puzzles together, and looking at one document will lead you to questions with other documents as well, and may unearth, there's that information. Let me go check that. Oh, it says that he was in the military. Let me go check and see what military records I can find from him. Did he actually serve, or was it just a draft card? So there's all sorts of different ways that you can find information, just from some little snippet in the thing that says Mr. and Mrs. John Smith just returned from a cousin's funeral that was held last Friday in whatever the town was. Now it may not take much to find it. There could also be, and this will surprise you, there could also be a guest list, a guest register at the funeral. And because the funeral, took place, 30, 40, 50 years ago, is the guest register still around? Has it been donated to a local society, a local family research society, or a local archives, where you can go in and you can see that there were 2 funerals on that particular day, you're still not sure which one was the cousin. Is there a local archives around that may have a guest register? Did the family have the guest register, or did the funeral home have the guest register? Funeral homes keep records too. So you could find out who the cousin was that way as well. But it could also be that if there's a cousin in there, there's going to be a common last name in there somewhere that's in your tree already, or that matches up with the maiden name of the wife or matches the last name of the husband. So there could be some matching in there as well. And then just even ask family members that are alive, hey, it's said in here that, this is grandma and I think this is, the grandparents that went to this funeral on this particular time for this particular cousin. Anybody know anything about it? You never know. Hi, Mama. Must be near 8 o'clock. So you never know. You can find records anywhere. Even if you're digging through family records, the family Bible, looking through documentation that you have that's all been piled into these boxes, you never know what you will find. And those are the best treasures when you can open them. I remember just before I left to do my big trek across the States back in February of 2020, I was up at my mother-in-law's place, and we broke into this trunk because we couldn't find the key for it. And I thought that was the trunk that had my husband's yearbooks, high school yearbooks in it. So I'm pretty sure that's what's in here. So we jimmied open the lock, totally destroyed the lock on the thing, opened it up. It was not yearbooks. There were 2 photo albums in there. There was a family Bible in there. There was a pile of papers wrapped up in a ribbon. And then there was a binder that had an index of everything that was in the yellow photo album, the blue photo album, and the pile of paper. And included in the pile of paper was even letters, and if I remember correctly, something about deeds and wills as well. And I was like, heart palpitations. It's like this treasure trove and it was all from my mother-in-law's side of the family. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so... And I was like, I need gloves. And so I'm just very carefully opening up the cover of the Bible and very carefully lifting the pages to see if there's anything written in the Bible. I mean, it had her grandfather's name. Yeah, her grandfather's name was embossed on the front of the Bible. And so that was kind of cool to see that. So there's a lot of history just in this little box, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I had the room to bring it with me in the RV so that I could look at it more and get more into it and everything else. But we've got it all together. It's still in LA, and on one of my trips to LA, I will be picking up that stuff and bringing it back so we can get what needs to get scanned and get it digitized. And if nobody in the family wants any of it, then we are going to donate it to one of the archives or the family history, or one of the family history places that will archive it, photograph it, scan it, all of that, make things available. Because I have like 4 banker boxes full of all the genealogical records that my mother-in-law collected back between the 60s, 70s, and into the early 80s, well before computers came along and digitized everything. Well, most of them. Some of it, just a little small portion of it. So I have all the birth certificates that she managed to get, the marriage certificates, the death certificates, wills, testaments, a whole bunch of, it still amazes me. There's 4 banker boxes, and then, those concertina files. I have 2 of those that are stuffed to capacity, sitting in another 2 banker boxes, because it's one in each banker box, and of documentation. And so my goal is to get all of that digitized and scanned and organized into folders by family name. I may even put it down to individuals. I don't know. I haven't fully decided yet, but we'll probably have like a main name thing, and then have different things in there. And in the main folder will be like a tree to show where people fit into the tree. And some of the documents we'll probably put with the family tree online, so that the documents are there if anybody in the family wants to see them. So yeah, I've got great plans for that stuff. It's just getting the coordination done to get it all done. But anyway, don't throw out anything with a relative's name on it, don't throw it out. It could be valuable at some point in time to the family. You never know what piece of historical records you may be tossing away. You never know. One was interesting was Brad and I went on a morning radio show one morning on Fridays. They would have some of their listeners come in and sit in the studio and watch everything being done for the morning show. And there was about 8 of us, I think it was. And we're sitting right behind one of the woman there who did the traffic reports every morning. And it turned out that she was actually from California and from LA. And so her and Brad got talking because Brad was born and raised in LA. And she was about the same age as Brad's oldest brother. And it turned out that the two of them, Brad's oldest brother and this woman, actually went to the same school together and were in the same graduating class. And because she was trying to figure out why Brad's name was so familiar, his last name. And so that's where we made the connection. And she goes, oh, I remember him. And so she starts telling us these little stories and things. So that was kind of cool to do that. And so now we can go back to those yearbooks that my brother-in-law ended up in, and we can go in and we can find her in there. So it's kind of like, it was a very long one. You know, we're all in DC at the time. We're in DC. She was born and raised in LA. Brad was born and raised in LA. Brad's oldest brother was still alive in LA. And it turned out that the older brother and this woman were actually in the same school together, got some of the classes they had together as well. And they were together in the same yearbooks. And they're in the same graduating class. So it was kind of interesting to find that out. Cindy Pro said, we had to come all the way to DC to find this out. You never know. You never know who you're going to meet, what information you're going to find. This is why keeping journals and writing your story down is so important, because you never know when that little story here may be the key to another story over here. So that's why it's very important that you write things down, even if you keep planners, writing appointments in there, putting notes in there. I have notes all over the place. I pity anybody who comes behind me to clean it all up. Who knows? Maybe I will get organized before my time here is done, so that it's in a logical format that they can all follow and read, and who knows. But anyway, I'm out of here. Time for dinner. Go have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening around 6 p.m. Pacific. Hey, Konera.